story points are not a measure of productivity, right? Don't fall into that trap. That one will bite you every time. So you've heard that phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's typically what I find, right? Is that the person who's setting the goals and outlining the product, what needs to be done, is also defining the rules for the team. And that does not work well.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Our guest today is Dean Kynaston. Dean is the co-author of 2 books, Agile Project Management for Dummies and Scrum for Dummies. Dean is the founder and principal coach at Tech Coach LLC, where he helps leaders and teams move faster, hit goals predictably, and enjoy what they do. Dean has decades of experience, consulted with several Fortune 500 and high-growth firms. He's a certified Scrum professional, PMP, psychological safety coach, and trainer. He is also an international trainer and speaker and has taught hundreds of people new tools and ideas to improve their work. Dean has an MBA from Boise State, bachelor's from Brigham Young University, and most interesting, he's the father of a blended family of 12, including 3 adopted sons and a grandfather. And you're coming to us from Idaho, right, Dean?
Yes.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thanks for joining us here.
Me.
Yeah. So we like to start the podcast off with a little segment we call the Spark. And really this is, how did you first get your start in this agile line of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started several years. I worked for an organization that was in Salt Lake City, a large nonprofit. We had a project that we had worked on for over a year and basically had nothing to show for it. People were mad. They were walking around talking about letting all of us go. It was an expensive project too, like millions of dollars, and it was really, really bad. And so we started looking around to say, okay, there's got to be a better way to work. What could we do? And so we found a group called Platinum Edge, which is a group that I work with, and they're fantastic. And they came in and they taught us some Scrum courses. So I got to take a product owner course and a Scrum Master course and loved it. And then we decided to try it. So we started off a new little team and, a new piece of this particular product that we're working on. And they moved us to the 18th floor that was kind of an abandoned floor in this office building. And we pulled the whole team in there, brought our monitors, our computers, and we set up at a big table and we started to put kind of our goal up on the wall. And then we built what's called a backlog of here's these features and capabilities that we wanted to put into this tool. And we started working together. So it was a cross-functional team. We had QA, we had developers, we had a person we called the product owner, and then myself, all in this room. And we were just working together. And we used 3-week sprints. And I still remember the very first sprint. After 3 weeks, the original project manager came into our room and his jaw just dropped because he couldn't believe how much we completed in such a short amount of time. And I fell in love with it. And then we ended up finishing that project in about half the time for a little less than half the budget. And it was really good. We released it in 3 languages. It went worldwide. And the managing director, I still remember him walking around and he was just so excited about what was coming next. I mean, we had this frequent release going, right, where there are lots of features coming out and he just couldn't get enough of it. From that point forward, I felt like there's no other way to really work. And ended up leaving that organization and I went to another organization that actually had 15 Scrum teams. And so I got to start seeing what it looked like in a much larger scale type of environment. And then in 2017, I went out on my own. And so I became a professional coach and started helping organizations and have just kind of grown and gone from there. But I hope that answers your question about how I got started. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. It's like, for anybody that might not be super familiar with Agile and Scrum, a certain way of working. Before Agile, what sort of way of working, what would it be referred to? Like the typical project management?
A lot of times they call that waterfall.
Methodology.
It's a waterfall project management methodology. if you think about it, Agile's kind of been around for a long time, right? It's based on the um, scientific theory, right? About you create a hypothesis and then you do experiments and
Yeah.
tests and learn and grow from there. But yeah, 2001 is when a group of individuals went up to Snowbird, actually in Salt Lake, and they came together and formed what's called the Agile Manifesto for software development. So it was, since 2001 is really when it's taken off.
So it started in software as a software development methodology, but it's now
I
been picked up by a
absolutely.
lot of
Yeah, there
different
is no
industries, would you
reason
say?
to only, use these principles and values on software development. We're seeing it scatter much broader than that. Everything from I've done several engagements in healthcare companies and worked in a pharmaceutical company for a while. I worked for the federal government. They're finding ways to apply it there. I just finished an engagement with a logistics company that was using Agile for enabling their carriers and their teams to better support Lowe's and Home Depot, as they're making deliveries. So very broad and lots of application. In fact, there's a cool application in education that's out there. If you look up Scrum, there's a really cool instance where they're applying that into a classroom environment and hoping the students take more ownership for their learning. And they're seeing test scores rising and students being able to graduate much earlier because they're applying the principles and values to education. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, one of the, I guess, core principles when I think of agile, I think of a principle of what you might
Yeah.
call lean in general is like small batch sizes, like deliver smaller chunks
You
of
got
value
it.
more quickly
Yeah.
rather than waiting till it's all done, small batches. Education is one of those where it seems like you could really do a good job of delivering small amounts of value. So, a lot of people in business, some people are like all in on a particular methodology, but a lot of companies have a little bit of a, I don't know, a mix, I guess, a potluck of a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the elements of Scrum and Agile. Let's start with maybe what is the difference between Scrum and Agile? Help us understand the language.
So other words to describe Agile would be nimble, adaptive, responsive. I once was on the bank of a river and I saw these swallows flying around uh, the river, and they were diving down to eat bugs or whatever that was out there. And the thought came to me about how agile these swallows are, that they can shift and curve, you know, just on a dime and switch directions. And that's what we want with an organization. We want it to become resilient, adaptive. Okay, so that's what agile means, is that we're trying to create organizations and teams that can be very responsive and adaptive to change because it's all around us, right? And one of the frameworks that's by far the most popular and the simplest to use is a framework called Scrum. And so Scrum is an agile framework because it allows teams to really adapt to the changing environment around them and help them to learn as they progress. So Agile is really just a set of values and principles that we take on, and they're common sense. Like, it's not revolutionary. It's just things that you would know. So for example, the 4 values of Agile are that we value individuals and interactions. We believe that that's more valuable than processes and tools. We're not saying processes and tools aren't important to us, but we believe that there's more value that comes in people working together in our interactions together that allow us to build better products and services for our customers. The second one says working software over comprehensive documentation. So what that value means is that we really value having actual working products and services more than a bunch of documentation about it, right? Documentation is important, but what's more important is what's this product that our customer is going to be using. The third value says customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And so we find it more valuable to actually collaborate with our customers than to set some sort of a contract that we set a fixed date and so forth. It's better to actually collaborate together to get to the right outcome that you need. And then the fourth one, which is my favorite, is that we respond to change. We find that's more valuable, responding to change over following a plan. And that's so true, right? You walk into battle and the great battle plan that you had now needs to adjust because things changed with your enemy, right? I think we talked about Mike Tyson, He has a famous saying that, your best laid plan flies out the window as soon as you get punched in the face, And so that's what we try to do
Yeah.
is we try to really adapt and adjust. Okay. And so that's what agile is just trying to incorporate those four values into the way we work. And then they went further and the authors of the Agile Manifesto created 12 principles that are just kind of like a litmus test to see if we're on the path of being agile. So that's what agile is all about. Now, if we talk about Scrum is a simple framework. It says in the definition a lightweight framework. So if you're making it, if it's hard, you're not doing it right, right? It should be very simple. And it's basically just, I call it the 3-3-5. There's three roles and accountabilities. So we have a product owner, a Scrum Master, and then a team member who has all the skills to build this product. And then we have three artifacts that we use. You'll hear about a product backlog, a sprint backlog, and then the actual increment itself or the piece of value that we've created, and then 5 events. And that's it. We just repeat those 5 events over and over and over again. So we start each sprint, which is a time boxed and usually they're really short, with a little plan. So we figure out what we want to do during that little time box that we're working on. And then each day we hold what's called a daily scrum or a daily stand-up, which is a 50-minute time box to basically we see how we're progressing towards our goal and then build a plan to coordinate our work for the day. And then at the end of the sprint, we hold what's called a sprint review, which is where we now look at the results of our sprint and get feedback from stakeholders and other people that we trust. And then right after that, we excuse all the stakeholders and we hold what's called a retrospective, where we look at how did our team do? What did we do well? What didn't we do well? What changes should we make this next sprint to make the next one even better? And then we launch into sprint planning again. So that cycle just repeats and repeats. And so what you'll see, and maybe this ties into continuous improvement quite a bit, is that not only does your product get better and better because of that feedback and the way that the team's working, but then also your team gets better and better. And so we see both of those continually getting better and better because of this Scrum theory.
Yeah, I love the simplicity of the model in terms of it's a set of like known behavior patterns that continue to improve the overall system, right? With the retrospective and the planning. I mean, it's a very good methodology for improvement, of course. Let me ask you a few questions about the specific roles. Let's talk just a little bit about, you mentioned the product owner, the Scrum Master, and then like the team or the developers. Tell us a little bit about what the responsibilities
So
are
the
for each of those
product
roles.
owner, this is the person that's responsible for the vision of the product. They're the ones that know what the customers are going to need, or at least have the idea of what they need. And they're responsible for making really tough decisions, like what features should we include in this product and what's the order that we should release these. And they make those decisions working very closely with the group that we call the stakeholders. And so with that group, they'll get ideas and then they'll take them back to their team and say, hey, here's what I'm learning. What do you guys think? And so they're really this captain of communication, I'd say, on the team, where they're taking in all that information that allows them then to set priorities that the team then works to accomplish. Okay, so that's the product owner. How do you know if you have a really good product owner? Is if they have the ability to say no. Okay, or not yet, right? So they're very decisive and they have to make those tough business and financial trade-off decisions with the team. And so it takes a lot of guts, right, to be a good product owner. And then I'd probably they call it developers in the Scrum Guide, but what they mean by that is anybody who has the skills that are needed to actually build the product. And so on a software development team, you might find people that the developers would be considered people who do testing or write automated tests or actually write the code. When I worked for the pharmaceutical company, our developers were actually clinical technicians and doctors and nurses that were in with us on our team, right? So it just depends on what the product or services that you're working on, but that's the next role. And their responsibility is to not only build the product, but also improve their skills. And so we want these people to become more capable. We call it T-shaped, where they may be really good in a certain aspect, but we want them to start getting exposure and growing in capability across the top as well. And what we find is that the more capable the team becomes, the faster they are. And so we take a lot of time to not only learn their trade and do it really well, but to learn others. And so it's kind of a really great incubator being on a Scrum team because you get to learn so much, right? So great career advancement opportunities, and which is, I love that about Scrum. And then the third person on the team, the third role or accountability is called the Scrum Master. And this is the person that's responsible for helping the team to get better. So they're a team improver, and they also work on removing any type of constraint that could potentially hold the team back. A lot of times you'll hear them talk about blockers or impediments. And so Scrum Masters watch for those, and then they do the hard work to get those out of the way. So they might be blockers within the team, or they may even be blockers outside externally to the team. And so their work is really tough. It's about navigating up and down an organization. And the way you know you have a good Scrum Master is that they have what's called clout, right? They can move heaven and earth to help their team be successful.
We're on the daily stand-up here, so let me drill into that just a minute. Great product. Check out Stand-Up Alice, of course, for managing those stand-ups. But there's some questions that are, I would say, kind of like a baseline, like if you're going to go start training somebody on Scrum, some baseline questions. What are those questions?
In the
that you typically ask?
2017 Scrum Guide, they laid out 3 questions where they said, what did you work on yesterday? What do you plan to work on today? And what impediments are holding you back? In the 2020 guide, though, they threw those out. And what they said is, we want you to talk about whatever you guys feel is important. And so the new guidance that they have is that we want you to just basically do 2 things. One is, as a team, look at what your goal is for that particular sprint and how that relates to the overall goal of the product. And talk about how you're progressing, right? Are we on track? Are we off track? Should we make some adjustments based on how we as a team feel we're doing towards our goal? And then the second part then is then to figure out your plan for the next 24 hours. So figure out who's going to work on what. It's almost like a football huddle, right? Where you have, 37 seconds or something like that to decide the next play and who's going to be doing what, and break. And then we go, right? And that's what we're after in the daily Scrum, is a quick touch point that allows us to see where we are and then figure out how we want to work together. A lot of teams too have more than one a day, right? You could do one in the morning and maybe one after lunch, or as soon as you guys finish a big piece or a big feature, you could have a quick daily Scrum to say, okay, let's get the next piece of work planned out. Who's going to be doing what, right? So really, there's a lot of flexibility in how we use those daily Scrums.
Excellent. Yeah. So you were kind of getting at, like, is morning of the day better than end of the day?
Yeah, my preference is morning, because it's kind of nice to get the day started off with just a quick checkpoint with the team. See how everybody's doing, right? Find out what happened the night before, who got into trouble, who didn't.
Yeah.
It's just a great way to start the day off with the team, and then kind of lays out the plan for the day. So
I think that's one of those things that just feels like truth. It just feels like a good idea.
Yeah.
Like starting the day with some sort of a plan just makes logical sense. And we of course see that happen in a lot of industries. Software development might be what Agile is most popular with, or maybe where it started, but so many other industries have similar rituals, whether it's, the guys meeting on a construction site to decide where are we going to dig the holes today, or the production meeting, law enforcement agencies, a lot, you have like the daily morning meeting. You're talking about keeping those short. Like, what's the
less than
ideal
15
like
minutes.
stand-up
Most of the ones
duration?
that I work with, we do them in 7 or 8, right? It's not meant to be long. It's supposed to be quick. In fact, we hold them standing. That's why it's called a stand-up, because when people sit down, they start talking so much, right? Waxing eloquent. You're like, hold on. No, this is meant to be a stand-up where we actually look at our board, look at our progress, and let's go, right? That's what's the fun part. Yeah.
It should be quick. Yeah. If
Absolutely.
you're spending an hour, you're
Absolutely.
probably taking too much time for that thing. Okay. I love it. Now, on these roles, you touched on basically 3 roles: product owner, Scrum Master, and the team. Are those 3 separate people? Can somebody wear more than one hat? How does somebody think about the roles and who
That's a
can do
good
them?
question. I typically find that it takes a fully dedicated person for at least each of the roles. So you gain a lot by having a full-time product owner that is really focused on building that product backlog and collaborating with stakeholders. It really turns into a full-time job doing that. The same thing with the Scrum Master, right? When these impediments pop up, you want them removed fast, and you need somebody that's focused on getting those out of the way, or looking at the team's flow and coaching the team on how to improve their performance. If that person is distracted with some other development responsibility, it's hard to get the true benefit out of those. And then developers, obviously, right? boy, testing is not easy and developing is not easy. If you're on a construction site, right, doing whatever you're doing there, it takes that full attention. But I will tell you this, the Scrum Guide does talk about how sometimes those roles can be shared. And I can get behind, let's say, a developer who is also the Scrum Master for the team. Those seem to work okay. I can also get behind a product owner who is also a developer. That can work, right? You just give up, quite a bit when some of those product owner responsibilities are not shored up. The one that I will struggle with, though, is when there's a product owner who is also the Scrum Master, right? So you've heard that phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's typically what I find, right? Is that the person who's just setting the goals and outlining the product, what needs to be done, is also defining the rules for the team. And that does not work well.
So if you're functioning as a consultant coming into an organization who had very little exposure to Scrum, or maybe it's just a group of, maybe kind of newer folks, where would you start with? Is there a person that you would want to, like, somebody has to kind of learn how to run the
Yeah, we
system? That
expect
sounds
them,
like the Scrum
that's the word
Master.
mastering it, right? We expect them to
Yeah,
be
like,
experts in Scrum.
if somebody was part of a team and they're like, well, I want to maybe just move from team member to Scrum Master, what sort of advice might
Yeah,
you give them on where to look for resources or how to go about
that's a
doing
great
that? What
question.
are
I
the
would
skill
probably
sets
start with
somebody
the
can
Scrum
pursue?
Guide itself. It's 2017's, I think, was like 20 pages long. 2020's is now 13, right? They made it a lot simpler and they made it more business language. So I would start there, right? Get a really good understanding of that Scrum Guide and the theory behind it. And then there's some great classes too that are out there, like a certified Scrum Master course, which is a 2-day course. Well, they will take you through Scrum and let you apply your learning. And then after that, this is where I typically come in, is that after a team has been through some training, then they typically call me to come in and, with my experience, help them to take the next steps and grab onto these new roles. So, and I love doing that. It's really a rewarding experience. But yeah, it's a skill that you can pick up. I find a lot of people really enjoy it because it's such a people building opportunity.
So you've worked in big companies, you've worked in small companies. I'm assuming in a small company, there's probably like one team and everybody's part of that one team. In a big company, some of these roles, maybe product owner, maybe team member, maybe Scrum Master, can you be part of multiple
Yeah,
teams?
we would discourage that. And the reason is because Scrum actually requires 5 values to be effective. And one of those is focus. And so having people multitask, the definition of multitasking is doing 2 things poorly, right? Walking and chewing gum is hard. And so we want people to be able to get their full attention on the goals and give their all to it, right? If you are, you know, percent allocated to this project, a percent to this one, and a percent to that one, now you have 3 masters, right? And it's so hard for you to be effective in that. So yeah, we really encourage people to be part of single teams. But now let's talk about some of the roles on that team. Developer, yeah, definitely single team. Scrum Master, definitely single team. But product owner, they could be the product owner for multiple teams. So let's say they started with one and realized we need to go faster. So let's hire another team to come on. So we would still just have one product owner, but he may have multiple, 2 or 3 or whatever teams are out there. His life gets really hard when that happens. But you want that product owner to be the person who can make those decisions, right? Who is available to the team. And so it works actually quite well with that, with a single product owner with multiple teams.
That's interesting. What about that Scrum Master role? It sounds like there's I don't know if mentor is the right word, but you've done some mentoring or teaching or coaching to Scrum Masters. Is that a role that exists in bigger companies
Yes,
where they're trying
absolutely.
to
Yeah,
train
and
more
we
people on
like to
that?
see a 1-to-1 correlation for that. We have a saying that goes, a good Scrum Master can be the Scrum Master for more than one team, but a great Scrum Master focuses on one team. And that's a skill set that is really interesting. It's like if you were to ask for who is the most personable person, that's who we're looking for these Scrum Masters. They're really great at relationships and they're great at, good leadership skills. That's what we want in Scrum Masters. We want them to be able to look like you were talking about lean earlier, right? I'd love to see Scrum Masters with lean training, right? That they could look at batch sizes and how to break things down smaller and really help a team to get their flow, right? Just sailing. Those are some of the most valuable skills that Scrum Masters can bring, is how to help people work together faster, better, and more effectively.
Yeah, I think one thing that I find interesting in this discipline of, let's just call it project management, strategy execution, is the definition of where one project ends and another project begins. So let's say that, sometimes organizations will have leadership changes and somebody will come in and be like, hey, we're going to go all in on Scrum. And maybe they had some other methodology and they come in and they're going to start setting up teams. I assume you've been involved in some situations like that, like getting a project kicked off initially. But what are some of the important things to get right when you're first setting that up?
I would probably start with the leadership group. That's the number one place to begin. And what we typically do is we call them the Agile Transformation Team. And it's a cross-functional team, just like all the others, but we staff it with leaders who can actually make organizational changes. Okay, so they own the status quo, and I want them on a team, and we choose a product owner on that team who's responsible for the overall outcome that we want from moving in this direction. We get a Scrum Master on that team as one of the leaders who raises his hand and says, okay, I'll do that. And then the developers, if you will, are the other leaders on the team, and we teach them to actually use Scrum to transform their organization. Okay, so they practice what they preach and they lead by example. That's the first step, right? Is getting the leadership lined up and actually demonstrating that they're embracing these agile values and principles. And then their backlog, one of the items might be to now experiment using Scrum on a particular team. Okay, and so now they're going to be the group that will help to form that new Scrum team, where they're going to change the organization so that they can free up a product owner and a Scrum Master and actually free up developers. And then they're going to work closely with the product owners to get the vision for this product clear so that a product backlog can be built. You're starting to see all the work that comes into bringing up this team. And then we use it as a testing model, right? So they're going to run a sprint and let's see the outcomes. We didn't quite get what we wanted. Why was that? What should we change? Okay, now let's help the team with the next sprint. Okay, now run the next cycle and let's see what happens. And so little by little, we start to see these teams. They actually go through 4 phases. And you're familiar with Tuckman's phases, right? Forming, storming. Yeah.
Yeah, explain that for anybody
Tuckman,
that might not be
he
familiar with
crafted what's called the Tuckman's phases, and every single team goes through these. They form, which means they come together and kind of get their rules in place. And then they storm, which you'll see the curve drop like this, where you think the wheels are going to come off this thing. People are fighting and they're not happy and they're frustrated with each other. And then they get to the norming, which is where we start to pull together as a team. And then finally we perform, right? And every team goes through that. Every change team goes through that, right? And so that's what that group of leaders is looking at, is how can I help that team get from forming to performing as quickly as we possibly can get there. And everything that falls off, the shrapnel and everything like that, goes onto their backlog and they work it so that the team is able to have that freedom and that ability to thrive and prosper, if you will.
I think that's such an interesting moment where you have some resources and you start to point them at a problem, and then they have to figure out how to go and interact with the people. Cause sometimes you're solving problems that people might feel like, oh, why are these experts coming in to fix this thing? Like, we didn't even know we had a problem or something. And I'm sure that as you're talking about the 4 stages of building a team, do you have any best practices or tips and tricks? I'm sure there's a lot of art to moving people through that, but are there some things that people could take away as best practices to how to move from forming, storming, norming, and performing? I think one of the key things
that we try to do with teams at the very beginning is we put together what's called a working agreement. And so this is where we get to sit down as a team and talk about the roles and responsibilities on the team. We talk about the behaviors that we expect. We talk about outcomes that we want. A model that I love, and this is from an author named Lisa Adkins, and she has this vision of a tree with roots and fruit. And so we actually put that up on the wall and we talk about what are the roots of our team. And we talk about those values that I was mentioning to you of courage, focus, respect, openness, forgetting one. Anyway, there's 5. And then the trunk of the tree, right, is our team. And then the fruit, we talk about what are the outcomes that we want as a team. Well, we want to advance in our careers. We want to gain new skills. We want to build a product that people love, right? And we kind of get that really clear at the very beginning. And that lays a really strong foundation for us going into the storm, because that's going to come next. And when we get into the storm, the keys there are, first of all, acknowledging it, right? To say, okay, team, we are in the storm, right? We're having evidence, right, that shows us that. Let's point back to our working agreement. Do we need to change it? What should we revise now that we're into this really hard part? I think those are probably some really good things. And then leadership support is just so key in all of this, where the team members realize that, their leaders are there for them and that they've got their backs. I love seeing when leaders actually not only set up the new team, but they start working on career paths for their people, right? And showing that, if you do want to go down this product owner role, guess what? Now we have a product owner 2 and a product owner 3 and a principal product owner, right? So that there's a path for this person into the future.
This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire. Are you struggling to ignite real change in your continuous improvement program? Firestarter is your field guide. Real stories, proven strategies, no fluff. Get it now on Amazon. I don't know if it's a challenge or an interesting point about Agile is that the measures of productivity sometimes can be a little bit different than what you might think they are. So let's just say KPIs or metrics. What are some things that people maybe wrong measurements or right measurements when it comes to how to measure team member participation or productivity?
Well,
with Agile?
that's a good
Scrum.
question. So maybe to talk about this one, we probably should talk about one of the Agile principles, and it's number 7, and it says something like working software is the primary measure of progress. Okay, so with an Agile, with a Scrum team, we're not looking at Gantt charts. We're not looking at, a budget report. What we're looking at is the actual service or product that we're building. Does it work? And could people use it, right? Is it going to help us accomplish the goals that we're trying to accomplish? And so what we typically look for there is we hold these sprint reviews where the team actually demonstrates the results of their work for us. And so we can physically touch what they're building and we can see and ask questions and really, stretch whatever that product is that they're working on and see how it works. So that's probably the best way to evaluate it, is by physically touching it yourself and seeing, if it's on the path that you think it should be. Some of the teams, what they do though is they'll set like a really big goal for, let's say, for the year, and then they'll build a backlog of here's the work that we see we needed to accomplish that goal. And they use what's called a story point. And I'm starting to move away from these more than use them because they create so many challenges and problems if they're not used correctly. But what they'll do is they'll look at each of those features and they'll start to size them and give some estimates about how much effort they think it will be to accomplish those particular features. And they relatively compare them, right? They'll say this feature compared to this one. This one's obviously bigger and this one's smaller. And so they'll put a smaller size on the smaller one and so forth, right? Well, with those numbers, we can start to do some estimating to say, okay, if each sprint, let's say we completed, 10 points, and our backlog is 100 points worth of backlog items, that pretty much tells us we've got about 10 sprints worth of work, before we'll accomplish that goal. And then each week, if our sprints are a week long, we can see how we're tracking, whether we're ahead or behind schedule, based on those numbers. But the thing I want to make sure we understand is that those are not a measure of productivity, right? It's just simply a guess about how much effort it will take. And when we actually dive into it, it's going to be a lot different than we thought anyway, too, right? So it's kind of just a good measure to give us a warm fuzzy about how much time things are going to take. But the reality, again, is actually physically touching it. Also, I typically tell teams that this is not information that you want to be sharing with your stakeholders. This is just for your team discussions. And so story points are really not valuable to anybody else. What people care about outside the team is the product that you're building and how good or bad it is, right? And these story points are simply just a way for the team to get a feel for how much either to pull into the sprint or for forecasting about when they think they're going to be completed with a particular aspect of their product.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. The question might be like, how do you know which team members are contributing the most value on a Scrum team? I've heard answers
And
kind of like, "Well, you just know," which sometimes from analytical perspective sometimes feels a little bit awkward. Maybe you could elaborate on that idea of what the team knows themselves that what some of
yeah,
those external
that's a good
stakeholders
one.
might not
So
be able to
first of all,
see.
let's just be clear. So story points are not a measure of productivity, right? Don't fall into that trap. That one will bite you every time, because as soon as you start playing that game, guess what? The team's going to start changing their story points, right? So don't go down that path. But what we do encourage, and I mentioned this earlier, is that openness is one of the values that we expect on a Scrum team. And so everything is open. For someone to walk into our team room and say, what's the status of, or how much progress you made? That's the stupidest question anyone could ever ask, because everything we do on a Scrum team, we make it transparent. Okay. Our product backlog, in fact, we used to put it on the wall with cards so people could physically see the cards, right? It's the same thing with our product backlogs today. Anybody should be able to access those and see which ones are in progress, which ones are done, how much is remaining. You can see all of that in the product backlog. The sprint backlog has the same thing. It has every single task that every single person's working on, and it shows what's still to be done, what's in doing, and what's been completed. And so if you want to know the status of a sprint, you just look at that board. You can see exactly. We also do this. We put people's names on those tasks so everybody knows who's working on what. There should never be a question about what are you working on, because we purposefully make that transparent so the teams can see. So your point earlier about we kind of just know, it really is true, right? The team knows who is carrying the weight on the team and who isn't. And those are great conversations for leaders to have with team members, right? To find more about that. In fact, we really encourage teams to have 360-degree reviews, right? That they're getting feedback from everybody that they work with on the team. And it comes out at that daily scrum that I was telling you about, the 15-minute huddle in the morning. One of the key conversations we encourage teams to have is around accountability, right? If someone is committed to doing something that didn't get done, the question should be, well, why? What happened? Did you run into troubles? Are you having a hard time getting your work complete? Do you not have the skills that you need? Do you not have the tools, right? We want developers holding each other accountable in those conversations so that we don't run into these problems of people not carrying their weight, right?
And
Yeah,
if you're doing this
that's
every
right.
day, I'm assuming, right, the daily stand up every day, you've got small enough chunks of work that hopefully you can identify something that you can make progress on. I know we use the term blocker, and so this is something that I find, somebody new to it, you kind of explain this idea of what a blocker is and how to surface them. How would you
Man, they
describe
are
what a
all
blocker
around. A
is?
blocker is anything that is preventing your team from accomplishing their goals. So it could be a dependency on another team. It could be missing access to a system. It could be you don't have the skills to actually build what you need to. It could be a leader or a couple of leaders with differing opinions and they won't align on, what the right direction is. That could be a blocker. Sometimes, we as leaders, we don't even know that we're putting those blockers on the team, right? So that's why it's really important for a Scrum Master to be able to speak up and say, the reason we're
Yeah.
held up is because of you and what you're doing. And let's talk about that and get those out into the open. But yeah, they're all around them. Sometimes we call them dragons and they need to be slayed, right? So that we can reach our goals.
Okay, well, Dean, I want to jump into a little section we call the rapid fire. These are just kind of some quick question answers, top of mind type stuff here. So the most important job of a leader is to
Set the
blank.
example, I'd say.
Example. That's a great answer. Do you have a favorite go-to problem-solving tool that
I
you
do.
find
It's
yourself
called dot
utilizing most?
voting. I don't know if you've heard of that before. So this is an
Dot voting. What's that?
opportunity for the whole team to get their ideas, their conflicting opinions out on Post-it notes. And then we hand out a marker and they get to go, we'll give each person, let's say 8 votes. And so they can use all of their dots on one card or they can spread them across multiples. And then at the end of it, we tally up whichever of those cards got the most votes is the decision. And then you can actually prioritize them down too. So anyway, it's kind of a fun way to help team find the least worst option that everyone can support, right? That kind of an idea. We could do it anytime, right? We could do it even in retrospectives about the biggest issues that we're facing, or if we want to use it for product backlog items to talk about which one should go first, where we should go for lunch, what movie we should see, right?
I like it. I love it. That's a great example. You've got a couple of books. You're welcome to plug those
Sure.
here. Are there any
Yeah.
other
So
books that
we've
you'd like
written
to recommend?
what I co-authored with Steve Ostermiller and Mark Layton. The first book is called Agile Project Management for Dummies. And it's about applying Agile and Scrum in an IT software development type of environment. And then the second book is called Scrum for Dummies, and they're both published by Wiley. They're meant to be reference tools. The Scrum for Dummies book, though, is about applying Agile to everything that's not IT. So we talk about manufacturing and finances and health and even dating and relationships. And I use Scrum to clean my house, in fact, right? So we talk about those types of stories inside that book. And it got published in Japanese too, which is pretty cool. And then as far as books go that I would recommend, if you are going down the transformation path for your organization, then the number one book that I would recommend is called Doing Agile Right by Bain & Company, and it's fantastic. It's got some really great advice in there for how to be successful in your agile transformation.
Excellent. Okay, do you have a favorite question?
That's my favorite question. Yep. And I use it all the time, right? That's how we get down to the real root cause of what's needing to be done.
I really appreciate you joining us here on the podcast and sharing some wisdom with us. It's been a super great conversation. Thanks so much for making time for us.
Wish you guys the best of luck. Keith, I know you guys have some great products there, and good luck to you. Keep going.
You bet. You bet. Thanks so much, Dean. If anybody wants to connect with you, what's the best way for people to get in touch? Is there a website you want to share?
LinkedIn, I'm on there. Dean Kynaston. My last name is Kynaston. And I also have deankynaston.com if you'd like to connect with me there. And we try to do a weekly guide of some key tips to help teams be successful. So if you go to that site, you'll be able to get on that list and I'll send you some helpful tips.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks again. We really appreciate you joining us, and thanks for your time. For our listeners, if you'd like to suggest a guest, ask a question, give any ideas for episodes or feedback, you are welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can also comment on the episodes. And this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to add a comment, maybe give it a rating, give it a like, a follow, a subscribe. Please share the podcast with friends or colleagues who are as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change.